Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Michael P. Spradlin. Michael is the New York Times bestselling author of the Spy Goddess series, the Youngest Templar series, and several other works of historical fiction. He's here today to talk about his newest book, Rise of the Spider, the first of 6 in the Web of the Spider series. It's a series about the lead up to World War II, and these books are quick, action-packed, and will be published at a rapid release. And thank goodness, because I'm hooked after the first one. So let's just get right to our conversation. Michael, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
I couldn't be more delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. I loved the book. It's powerful. It's incredibly important. It was so immersive. I ignored much of my children and the dogs and everything around me as I was finishing it. And we'll get to that today, but it's not the first book you've written.
No,
It's not your first rodeo, is it?
not even my second rodeo.
So I was hoping you could go back in time a little bit and just tell us a bit about you and your work and your books for listeners who don't know all that you have written before we get to the book that we're talking about today.
Well, it's a pretty broad palette, actually, or a portfolio, or whatever you want to use. I started writing, gosh, back in 1990s. And my first book was a picture book called The Legend of Blue Jacket. After that, I tried novels. I wrote the Spy Goddess series, which was in the first book, my very first novel was nominated for Edgar Award for Best Juvenile Mystery, which I thought, okay, maybe I can do this. And little did I know how hard it was going to be to keep going, but I did. And after that came The Youngest Templar, and that was just hugely successful, especially overseas. Sold in it amazed me how many countries, I think 13 countries, and even Russia, which is, I think I get paid in goats and cheese or something. But, but it was a big seller internationally, which I guess kind of makes sense because that's kind of their history. So, and then, some more picture books sprinkled here and there, and on to some historical fiction, which all or 3 of which are very near and dear to my heart. And then this book came out of a conversation I had with an editor at Simon & Schuster, and I had originally broached the subject of writing about a group of kids in World War II called the Edelweiss Pirates, which were a group of young people in the later years of the war who were fed up with the Nazis, fed up with Hitler, and started engaging in monkey wrenching and sabotage and propaganda. Actually, some of them were, young kids, and some of them were caught and executed. And, but I mean, to the amount of bravery of it has always fascinated me. And then we kind of got into this conversation about how in the heck did this happen? How do middle grade readers really know how? They know Hitler, they know World War II, but do they know how he got to where he was? And the answer was pretty much no. And so we ended up here with Web of the Spider. The first book is Rise of the Spider. The next one after that is Thread of the Spider, and that'll be Spider, 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 in various descriptions. But it was I think easily the most challenging book I've ever written. The first book in a series is always the hardest. Um, I always say the first and last book in a series are the hardest ones because with the first book, you've got to invent the world, you've got to establish the characters, you've got to give their backstory, you've got to do, you know, and in the following books, you can just let loose and go because it's all set up. And then at the end, you've got to make sure that you tie everything together. Um, so, you know, and then the second part of that question of being, difficult was this is a lot of like socioeconomic, political, historical stuff to try to distill down to a middle grade audience without it being preachy or a lot of exposition or info dumps or long dialogue where characters just out of the blue start explaining things. That doesn't work. And I came up with the idea of the newspaper stories, which I think we recreated these front pages of a fictional newspaper in Nuremberg, and was able to use those to kind of set the stage for the reasons why, some of the, I mean, Hitler first attempted to take over Germany, or at least Bavaria in 1923. The first book set in 1929. So there was a 6 year gap there. So it just went back with these headlines to kind of establish a timeline for the reader to follow along. And I guess people think it worked. The reviews have been pretty good.
It
It's
did. It
it's
did.
on
There were a couple of things that you said that I couldn't wait to talk to you about, and one of them was I do feel like there are books out there on World War II. There are books of different perspectives, but I really didn't feel like there was a book like this yet. The before, like you said, the lead up. What happens when a place where it seems like nothing can go wrong, and then this one little thing goes wrong? And then another little thing goes wrong, and to be able to see that from a different perspective of a child who's in the middle with a really fun, snarky friend and an older brother that's, got some changing. There was so much going on that I thought, "Okay, I haven't read a book like this about this topic
right,
yet." And I
right.
I really appreciated that. I really enjoyed the before, even before the before,
I
almost.
Yeah, it was. One of the things I talked about with my editor when I was working on it was that um, I have a little sign up on my whiteboard that says "They're still kids,"
Mhm.
and so uh, they're still kids. They're going to be making dumb jokes and they're going to be giving each
Yes.
other knees, and no matter what's going on around them, they're still young people. And to try uh, and they're still, and Ansel, you referred to as snarky and wisecracking. I guess I always have one of those in one of my books, and I
Yeah.
guess that's probably my personality coming through. But and Ansel will be the star of book two. So it's going to feature a different character in each subsequent volume, so they'll have these multiple viewpoints. So it's again, I don't know. I just felt like it was a good thing, and that I can't do a book without some humor in it anyway. So sorry about that. So it's tough to like I said, to distill all that down and yet try to keep it enjoyable and have action and in what is a really, in truth, a really just horrific uh time period,
Yeah.
in a horrific setting. I mean, it's um so but I think I'm almost done. My famous last words. I'm almost done with book two, and I feel like I really got the hang of it now. So I'm looking for the next books to move pretty quickly. So um,
So am I, because I don't give spoilers here on the Kid That Love podcast, but at the end of that book, admittedly, when I read it, I wasn't aware that it was a series. And so I finished that last page and I went, wait, no. There better be one coming, and there better be one coming quickly. So I was really glad to see that there is more. There are a series
sure.
coming. But I didn't know that spin on it, so I do love knowing that it's got a different focus in each book, so you're really
Right.
giving us the big picture and a
Uh,
perspective on
in book three, it'll be a Jewish boy. their friend Joshua will be the centerpiece. And in the book four, it's a set of twins whose parents are communists, which are, also vastly hated by the Nazis, and so on. So it's trying to give a multiple perspective to young readers. And one of the things I think, if I always get asked about, messages in my books and meanings in my books and things like that, and uh, I always say, well, I don't know, because I've never intentionally written a book with a message. But if there is, to me, a message in this book, that message is pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening. In the afterword, I talked a little bit about my mom and when I first became old enough to vote. And I always remember her telling me, she said, the national elections are certainly important, but pay attention to your local races,
Yeah.
your judges, your commissioners, your council members. Uh, and and then when I just started researching that, her words came rushing back to me, because when Hitler was convicted of treason and put in prison, all three of the judges in his trial were Nazi party members. So they sentenced him to 5 years for treason, and he got out in 10 months for good behavior, if you can imagine that. Um, so that's, I guess that would be my message to kids, that you need to pay attention. It might seem boring, it might not seem interesting, but it can happen, and it has happened. And if you don't pay attention and be vigilant, um, there's that old saying, I think mistakenly appropriated to Thomas Jefferson, that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And I think, I hope this book demonstrates that.
Yeah.
That would be my hope.
I really enjoyed, I always love when an author does put some extra information in the back, and I do feel like the message that maybe you didn't intentionally write, but the message that I took away as a reader, and then I know a lot of children will, or adult readers, because we want everybody to read Kidlit, but is that the little things matter.
Right,
And perhaps we have a little bit more control over at least the sphere around us than we
right,
think that we can,
right,
make a difference, just one of us, even if it's in the difference of just one person,
right,
that has that effect. I did feel that message in the narrative, and then it was like a nice double punch in the author's note, again, just reminding, like, this was a beautiful setting, a beautiful place to live, ideal, and
I'm
look what happened.
obsessed with Harrodsburg, where the book is set. It is
Yeah,
just absolutely gorgeous.
yeah,
And the whole Bavarian countryside. I mean, every time you turn around, you think you're going to see Cinderella's castle, on a hill. It's just incredible. And I, I truly wrestled with the idea that I was like, how can a place so beautiful engender such a evil, hateful
yeah,
view of the world? And it wasn't the place. The place doesn't matter. It's the people. But I mean, it's like, if you had maybe paused and took a couple of breaths, uh, maybe things might not have happened, and just looked at the world around you and realized how beautiful it was. If they had kept Hitler in prison for his full 5 years, things may have been vastly different. I mean, so all these little things come into play, like you said, and spin on and have big impacts. And so it's but yeah, the time I spent over there, I was just like, man, this is like the most one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen.
yeah.
So yeah,
And I appreciated your note in there too. You said, visiting the place that you're writing about can go one of two ways. It could
right,
backfire, or it could be
right,
really, really great. And I always love getting a peek into that too. And it made me curious about your research process, or just your process in general of doing what you said, remembering their kids and having these storylines and these entry points that are very kid-like the friends, getting the food and having
playing
fights with your
football, and
dad, and yeah,
yeah,
playing football and thinking of, what could come next. You've got that with the very real reality and, like you said, very hard thing of what's going on. And I just wondered, how'd you do that? How do you balance it while also researching and making sure,
right,
that everything there is not only correct, but then developmentally appropriate for the reader that you have in mind. So there's my big question for you. How'd you do it?
And that's an excellent question. Research is, I always tell kids when I visit schools that, writers will spend way more time researching than they do actually writing.
Right.
And for most of them, maybe 10 or 15% of the research actually goes into the book. I mean, it's all about establishing the voice and the setting and, and getting the details right. For me, it's been a little bit of a challenge because a lot of the places that I write about don't exist anymore. Now, like for the youngest Templar, like I went to Dover and to the castles and whatnot that are mentioned in the book. I did not go to the Middle East because much of what I write about is no longer there. And I'm also have very little value as a hostage, but um, it and then other things happen, like my book on the USS Indianapolis into the Killing Seas. Well, there's nowhere to go. I mean, I could have gone to the coordinates in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and said, okay, this is where it happened. But oh, look, ocean, it's blue.
Right.
And there's dark. And so but in this case, I was shocked because we went to Nuremberg and Haraldsburg for a week about in 2022. And I was amazed at how much it made a difference in my writing. I mean, it just, I I've had people tell me like Harrodsburg especially just kind of jumps off the page, in the descriptions and
Yeah.
the cobblestone streets and the old houses and the cathedral and I, you know it was I could the reason that I went in the first place was because with Nuremberg after the war, it had been almost virtually destroyed, but by bombing. But they built it back the way the old city looked. They reconstructed it to be like the medieval city it was before the war. So I said, okay, that would be different. That would give me something that I can use in the book. And then just like doing I think two of the most powerful moments for me were visiting Dachau in just north of Nuremberg a bit. And after that, I just felt like I needed to take steel wool to my soul after I went there. But then I went to the Hall of Justice in Nuremberg, where the Nuremberg trials were held. And what's interesting about it is that the courtroom where the Nazi leaders were trialed is still a working courtroom. It's They did not make it into a museum and they still fly the four countries' flags outside the building. And it made me think, and I read a lot on it just because I was curious, and I never did find anything, but I like to think that the reason they kept it as a normal courtroom is because it was saying to those people, "You are nothing. There's nothing special about you. There's nothing to be memorialized about you. You're thugs and criminals, and you are going to stand before the rule of law and take the judgment of our justice and pay for what you did." And that really helped cure me from, the Dachau visit a little bit, to think that I don't know if that was their thought or not. I'd like to think it was, but it was my thought. And I think that might have been part of it, at least, is that we're not going to give these men anything. They take, we don't take. We give justice. And it was a very powerful moment. It really was. So so it made, like I said, it made a really big difference to go and visit places. I've gone, for other books, I've gone to places like the Alamo and my Texas Ranger book. I visited most of the sites in Texas that are in the book. And but what you also find as a writer is you get on some very tight deadlines, which makes it very difficult sometimes to go places and spend the amount of time that you would really need. You can get like a surface level, but thank God for Google Street View,
Yeah,
because it's
that's
like
right.
yeah, it's just amazing what you have at your fingertips now to be able to research things. So, but that was, it was an amazing trip. I still think about it. I have pictures up all over my office for, inspiration um, so, it was amazing.
Yeah. It does, the story does have a very strong sense of place. And I mentioned, I said the word immersive. When I started reading it, I read it in one sitting. Now I am an adult reading a middle grade novel, so that's not a huge feat, but I waved off children. I the dogs, I thought, "No, I was
Or
feeling it." Yeah, don't
tell 'em
worry,
I'm
it's okay
sorry, I'm
later,
sorry, sorry. You didn't get your milk bone, puppy, I'm sorry.
but But it was just one of those books where I didn't want to let it go, and I'm still not letting it go.
Right,
I finished reading it, it is still with me, it is still
right,
there, and it was just so powerful on both the reading experience level where I felt in it, I felt there, I felt those emotions, and again, I won't give away spoilers, but the conflicting emotions of what's happening in my family and what is going on and what's happening in the
right,
world around me, um, while also, connecting as an actual adult reader, thinking back on the time of, oh yeah, this was real. This
right,
was real. And
right,
this shows a little bit of how, while hopefully nothing like this, would
right,
ever happen again, there is a lot in the world today that we could
right.
feel maybe a little bit more empowered over if we felt like our small actions mattered or that we could be on the lookout for them. I felt myself thinking, "Okay, that was then, but hey, there's a lot going on now."
Yeah, I guess, again, I'm tripping over messages here, but I think my message to children would also be, and any reader, the dangers of extremism in any form.
Yeah,
I mean, it no matter which political direction it comes from, it never ends up well.
right.
You've got the Nazis over here, and you've got Stalin and Mao over here, and it's, uh, we need to be in the middle, and get along and learn to get along with each other. That I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I hope so, but it's it is just quieting, I think, to think about some of the parallels to today that the book makes, and the fact that I think one of the most powerful to me scenes in the book is when Hans and the Hitler Youth attack the grocer, Mr. Garber.
Yeah,
They've been blockading his store, not letting people in. He comes out to confront him. He's an old man, and they just give him a beating. And that happened every day in Nazi Germany. And it wasn't even in Nazi Germany yet. And what I think I felt the most about was that it's Rolf and Ansel who go to his aid.
yeah,
And at one point, they stand up and they look around, and all the townspeople are watching, but no one's helping.
yeah,
So to me, it was like, yes, that is the one person making a difference. That is the one person not only caring for this individual who's been hurt, but standing up and looking people in the eye and saying, shame on you,
yeah.
shame on you. Um, and that was, to me, that was a fun scene to write, I think. I hope that came through when I, I wrote it.
That was a very powerful one for me because again, you feel like you're there. You feel like you can feel the emotions of these characters, especially him, and that was a moment for me as well, of just kind of sitting in it and imagining that. And
Right.
and also knowing, when you talked about your message, like it will be kids that move us forward. It will be kids that get us out of this. And so to read a book like this, that, like I said, I feel is from a different perspective than we've ever
Right.
seen in a book at that time, they may be fictional characters, but they really are real life role models in some ways.
Yeah, I believe so. I think Rolf, the main character, he's he's like, I think any kid that age would be. He's just horribly confused.
Yeah.
His family is being torn apart, his town is being torn apart, his country is being torn apart, and he just doesn't understand. He's not. he's 12 years old, he's not at but he knows right from wrong, and he knows what is right and what is wrong. And he has a very strong feeling about that. And but yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's going to take uh this generation and the next and maybe the next to get us to a point where we can, you know, let's just, like I said, take a breath and listen to each other. We don't have to agree with everything about everybody and everyone's opinion, but we can listen. We got ears, and try to understand where people are coming from.
Yeah.
It's again, take a breath and look at nature, and then dive in. So,
Well, the one other thing I want to mention before we wrap up, I'm a big list maker. So I have lists of all sorts of books that I love, books I've hugged, books I read in one sitting. Yours is on there now. Books with great first lines, and I ended up making a new list with yours at the top because while I always love looking at opening lines, I've never been so struck by an ending line in this book. And I'm not going to say what that ending line is because I want readers to experience that for themselves. But woo, what an ending! What an ending! So I need to ask, when is book 2 coming out? Because I really don't want to wait that long.
it'll be out. It's called The Thread of the Spider, and it stars Ansel, and it will be out in summer next year.
Okay.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I get I get a lot of grief from kids about cliffhangers.
Yeah.
And I have the Youngest Templar trilogy. I thought I was going to be stoned at a couple of schools because of the massive cliffhangers at the end. But I would always tell them, they're like, why, we're in this instant gratification
Yes.
uh world now. I mean, and I'm guilty of it myself. I put something in the microwave and I'm like, 4 minutes, you know, I can't wait that long. What's
Good
four,
point.
and they're like, why do you do that? Why don't you tell us what the end? And I said, well, do you watch television shows? And they're like, well, yeah. And I said, and at the end of the season, do they have like a season ending cliffhanger? And they're like, well, yeah, I don't like it, but they have them. And I said, but when the show starts up again, what do you do? They're like, well, I go watch it. And I said, when the book ends with a cliffhanger, what do you do? You know? And then they go like, oh.
We get it now. We get it now.
So it is a maybe a dirty trick, but I don't know. It's just kind of I I get it's funny because I've worked with several editors, and like early in books, I will always get comments, editorial comments like, would like to see more of this person's whatever. Can we get a better description of this whatever? And I'm like, wait till you go to the next 10 pages. I like to peel the onion.
Yes.
I don't like, he was 6'4", 220 pounds. He had blue eyes and blonde hair. Now I want to find out things as I go along. That's just me, and I know not everybody is like that, but that's what kind of just how I do it. And I'm like, be patient, grasshopper. It will come,
That's right. That's
and and
as
it
an
usually does.
yeah, and as an educator, I used to work with children. Now I work with teachers teaching children's literature, and those hooks or those cliffhangers that come at the end, like that's what keeps kids reading. Like I am all for a cliffhanger so that I can put that next book into
Right.
into that child's hands. It's just if you read it, right when it comes out, you do have to wait a little bit, but that's okay. And lots of books are patiently waiting for us. We can patiently wait for them sometimes when we need them. So
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because this is the first time with a series that I had learned about this many years ago when I was first starting writing, and there's a mystery writer, Lawrence Block, who I saw him speak once, and he said that his method is to go spend about 11 months researching the story. Then he checks into a hotel or a writer's retreat or something somewhere not near his home. And in 30 days, he writes the book, and he starts backwards. He starts with the ending and
mhm,
writes because it's a mystery and he wants to know how the mystery ends. And I was like, well, gosh, he's like one of my favorite writers. That must be the secret. So I said, I'm going to try that. And I tried it, and then after about 30 pages, I had a bunch of poorly translated Bulgarian. It seemed like I that's not going to work for me. So I found my method. But in this case, with this story, I wrote the ending already. I know exactly how this is going to end. And it's not going to be a cliffhanger. It won't leave anybody hanging, but there'll be a. I think, in fairness to kids out there, I'm planning. I don't know what my editor will say, but I'm planning a prologue about what happens to the kids after the war. So that
Mhm.
some of them will have been in the military, some will have been in concentration. The whole
Right.
spectrum of events that took place then. So that's that's the plan anyway. I hope I can pull it off.
So ultimately, we'll get a full circle that we're looking for, but we're gonna have some cliffhangers on the way.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned list. It just made me think of this since this is going to air in September. It's going to be on Kirkus's list of 150 most anticipated books of fall. Uh,
Ah,
found out. So librarians and teachers, Kirkus,
yes,
150 anticipated books.
yes,
Tell your friends.
yes, and should be. Should be. I've read it. It should be.
Agreed. Agreed.
I will certainly, be sharing it, and yes, if listeners are listening in real time, the book will be published September 24th, which is just a couple of days away, so they can get their hands on it now, and now we know book 2 will come in the summer sometime of 2025, which I will wait patiently for. Thank you. Is there, um where can listeners find you online if they wanna find out more about
Right.
you?
You can follow me through my website, michaelspradlin.com. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter. My Twitter handle is at mspradlinauthor. And then I have a Facebook page, a fan page, Michael P. Spradlin. So,
Okay.
and I try not to overpost, but I do put news and events and stuff up there. So, and it tells how to contact me and all those things. So you can go to my website and click contact and you'll get right to me. So,
I'll be sure to put links to those in the show
great,
notes, and I'll
very
also
much.
put links to the books that we mentioned in the show notes to make it easy for people to just click and find as well.
Thanks.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really loved it.
Awesome. And maybe I'll come back for the next book.
I wasn't gonna let you leave without asking that. Now it's on air, so it's official. I will come find you later when it's closer to the time.
Right. Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And
Thank
listeners,
you.
thank you for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.